This is the show we are so unbelievably proud to bring you. Bret the Hitman Hart, for the first time since his stroke, a worldwide exclusive. Where was he immediately after the stroke? How about his recovery? And Vince McMahon, what does he think of him now? Bret Hart, one-on-one. Bring it on.
Off the Record with Michael Landsberg is brought to you by the Keg Steakhouse and Bar. For great steaks, good friends, see you tonight.
I don't want to take too much time here. If you're watching, you know what we've got today. A great wrestler, a very good friend, and a really inspirational guy, Bret Hart. This interview is a worldwide exclusive. It's the first TV that you have done since you had the stroke, so thank you so very much for trusting us with us. Nice to see you. Nice to see you looking so good.
Glad to be here.
First off, we should start with your amazing recovery. You look great right now. Hair's a little bit short. On one hand, I know that you're here to talk to your fans, but also to test yourself. Everybody knows that you had a stroke. They may not realize that it was very serious, that you were actually paralyzed on the left side of your body and almost died. Sitting here today, I got to ask you, how you feeling?
I feel really good. I feel, I am glad to be alive and glad to be where I am today. When I remember where I was before, when I had the stroke, kind of like if you were at the bottom of a barrel, I was at the bottom of a real deep hole, and I remember those moments when I first had the stroke, in the first few weeks and maybe even the first couple of months. There's some pretty dark times for me.
I think we want to put it in perspective for people that they don't understand, because in the world of wrestling, it's all about a work, and it's all fake, right? But this is as real gets. You were riding your bike, you fell, you're in the hospital, the doctors tell you you have a stroke, you've had a stroke, that your life's in jeopardy. I want you to tell me physically what you were not able to do at that point.
When they took me into the hospital, all I had was a little bit of feeling in my toes and a little bit of feeling in the tips of my fingers. And I didn't get it. I didn't know what it was. I didn't find out till about 4 in the morning that I had the stroke, that I had one. And I didn't understand it, and I was actually thinking, for the first 4 days, even though they told me what it was, I kept thinking, I'm just gonna get up and walk out of here in about a week or 2 weeks. 3 weeks from now, I'll be sitting in my house joking about this. And it took me about 4 days, and then I think it was even my doctor came in, and I asked him the question. I said, I guess I should get used to the fact that I'm not going to get up and walk out of here. And he said, you're looking at 6 months just to recover.
But there were no guarantees, right? I mean,
no.
You walked in today with hardly a limp. You and I talked before we went on camera for a half hour. You sat and you ate sandwiches, you had a cup of coffee, we laughed about all kinds of stuff. I mean, this is literally a staggering achievement, and there was no guarantee at that point that you would ever be able to walk unassisted, that you'd ever be able to lead a normal life.
No, they don't make any guarantees, because I think, unfortunately, a lot of stroke people don't recover, or they don't get a lot of it back, and so they don't want to make any big promises. And they were very vague, and I could see that they were being vague, and you sort of sink. Depression, and you're emotionally you're devastated. You know, if you go to a stroke ward, everybody on it's in tears, and everyone's crying, and it's a very, very depressing hallway to walk down. But there was I had some really good people that, especially the physio people in Calgary at the Foothills Hospital. They really worked well with me, and they pushed me, and I have met a lot. I have a newfound respect for hospitals and nurses and the people in that healthcare system, that, not just with me, but all the people in the physio department.
So your life was cruising along pretty normally. You had been recovering from a post-concussion problem that had forced you to retire from wrestling. You were telling me that you had an invitation from Daniel Agali the night you had your stroke to have dinner with
Kofi Annan, the head of the United Nations. They had the summit. I was actually riding my bike to ride downtown to kind of just check it out, the summit. And yeah, I mean, 1 minute I was on top of the world, and the next minute I couldn't even turn my hand over or anything. It was...
So I want to ask you then, as you sit in this darkness that you talked about, you're depressed, you're wondering about the rest of your life, where was the first ray of sunshine? At what point did you realize, you know what, I'm seeing some positive situations here that are developing?
I don't know. That's hard to answer. I think the first, I mean, I was able to stand on my leg, but when I was able to do that, it was a big thing to stand and sort of be able to walk, but I couldn't really walk yet. I could use the wall or something or lean on something. But I think one of the first things, I just remember I woke up in the morning in the hospital and I hadn't been able to move hardly anything, just a little bit of my fingers now. And I remember I just looked at the nurse came in and I went like this. And that was a big thing.
Now, you were a guy who had to put up with enormous amounts of pain in the ring, right? I mean, that's what it is. To wrestle for Vince McMahon, you got to be able to go out there when you're in pain. You got to go out there when your shoulder is killing you. Contrast the pain that you thought was so extreme from when you wrestled to what you felt, immediately after your stroke.
No comparison. I mean, the stroke, I wasn't really in a lot of pain, but I think, it was definitely my biggest battle. Like I couldn't get around being, like having I couldn't do anything.
Let me ask you this. Did the fact that you were a high-performance athlete, that you were used to training in the gym all the time, that it was all about staying in shape, and it was all about putting up with the pain of being in the gym, did that help you or did it hurt you?
In the beginning, because of my muscle mass, say, and my size and stuff, it's actually works against you because you have to carry around more weight than like if you're a smaller, thinner guy, it's a lot easier to start recovering. But in saying that, once you get to say like where the halfway point of the 6 months that I started to recover, after about 3 months, all that muscle mass and your old strength and your old pistons everything starts to come back. Then I start to recuperate faster than someone that didn't work out, and it starts to benefit it. But it does not in the beginning because you're dragging around like a 50-pound leg and a 30-pound arm.
I got to ask you, and we'll take a break so we can reload. This is amazing. This is Bret Hart. It's the first time that he's talked, and we totally cherish the fact that you're doing it on this show. I want to ask you about Vince McMahon. I want to ask you about who responded to you and who didn't, and lots more. Bret Hart, one-on-one on Off the Record. The best thing about this is that you're alive and well and looking really good. Great to see you, man.
That's for sure.
Off the Record with Michael Landsberg is brought to you by the Keg Steakhouse and Bar. For great steaks, good friends, see you tonight.
Bret Hart, one-on-one on Off the Record. You talked about your situation, how dark it was, how devastated you were by your stroke. But there was a point when you recovered and you understood that, you know what, I got a shot and I'm probably going to be able to go back to living a reasonable life. When you realized that, how much had your impressions, your values, what you thought about life, how much had they changed at that point?
I went through so many different phases. Like in the beginning, in the first few weeks that I had a stroke, I tried not to get bitter. I was really angry about it. I couldn't believe it. I was like, like I was really mad and I was really bitter and just really down. And once I started getting little things back, like I can tell you it was a huge thing for me. And I used to get in the car every day. They'd pick me up and put me in the car, take me home sometimes for a weekend pass. I'm living at the hospital. And I remember I would flip the visor down in the car. And I would stare at it, and I can remember for weeks, maybe months, I couldn't wink. My eye was just like that. And I can remember flipping it down one day and going, and it was just such a huge thing.
Well, the ability to wink is of uppermost importance to most
men. Meant a lot to the
nurses, too. So how do you look at life differently now than you would have at the peak of when you wrestled? I mean, you were known for your focus to wrestling, but how does your impression change of the world around you and what you want?
Well, I think you get started looking at what's really important to you, and like all the things that seemed important the day before. A lot of my hard feelings towards people didn't mean as much, and it's like you got to get on with the important things like your family and things like that in your life that are so much more worth putting your time into.
One of the things that you find out, besides how you find out how people feel about you, right?
Yeah.
So you have this, devastating situation, which I want to know, and it's obviously we're talking about people that the folks at home would know from the world of wrestling or whatever. Who was there for you? Who do you feel, really they were there?
Well,
when
I want
you
to say
needed them?
first and foremost, obviously my family was there for me. My wife Julie was tremendous. She was really, really good, and my kids were all great. But I have to say something about Walter Gretzky, who made contact with me in the first few days that I was in there, and was just a real it was a real support for me. And I don't even know if Walter Gretzky knows how much he did for me.
Well, I mean, he's a walking example, I guess, from your standpoint of where you could go, which is the greatest inspiration. But that's the kind of inspiration that you can now be for somebody else, right? Someone who's watching the show, who is a family member, who was in your position, can show this tape to them and say, see?
Roddy Piper was another one. Roddy Piper came up. I had a lot of the Canadian wrestlers called me. Benoit, Jericho, Edge, all these guys. A lot of the guys that... a lot of the Canadian wrestlers called me. For some reason, I didn't get a lot. Undertaker, we spoke, and I had a lot of old friends finally call me and that kind of thing. It's funny, after I left the WWF the way I did, and even the way I left the WCW, I think a lot of wrestlers were afraid or intimidated to call me, or maybe they didn't want to open up that can of worms, or maybe it would get them in trouble for talking to me or something like that. But I never heard from too many wrestlers, even after, especially after my brother Owen's passing. I kind of found myself isolated because people just didn't want to go there. They didn't want to talk about it, and with the lawsuit and all the stuff that was going on.
You and I have always spoken candidly. I mean, you've been open and honest, and I always say to you, is there anything you don't want to talk about? And you say, ask me anything. And after Owen's death, you spoke about Owen's death and the people that you felt had betrayed you and all of that. And I know that was so divisive for your family, but sitting here today after your stroke and your recovery, has that helped to bond your family once again? Because sometimes it does have that effect.
No, I can't say it did, because I think the divisiveness in my family was brought about over, for me anyway, was the loyalty to my brother Owen and the disloyalty to him by some members of my family. So I found actually when I had my stroke, I scratched several names off my guest, like my list, to come visit me. I didn't even want them to come in. But
who was that?
My sister Diana, who was married to Davey Boy. I never really saw eye to eye with her, and I kind of closed the door on them, and they don't exist for me anymore. Ellie, my sister Ellie, who was married to the Anvil, they were too hell-bent on getting jobs for their husbands rather than thinking of Owen and his family, and I never forgave him for that.
I want to hear what you have to say about Vince McMahon, but I want to say that your slogan was the best there is, the best there was, and we can still say the best there ever will be. He's Bret Hart. What's the situation with Vince McMahon? Hold on to that. We'll find out next. As Bret Hart told us every single time he's been on the show, go wherever you want. Probably the guy that you have had the most abrasive, the most on-again, the most off-again relationship with is Vince McMahon. You came on the show in 1997 and talked about Survivor Series, about how he had betrayed you, about how you smacked him and all of that. Sitting here today in 2003, do you still hate the guy?
No, I don't. Well, hate's a big word, but I don't know.
Just so you know, Bret, I'll bail you out of anything. I'm not bailing you out of this one. Do you still hate Vince McMahon?
No, I think I've moved on past that a little bit. I certainly don't forgive what he did. I don't care for how they justify. They try to minimize it all today, like it was nothing, and it was part of it. It was just doing business, and it was never about business. It was just about being dishonest and unfair. And I've never been too happy with what they did. But when I had my stroke, he called me in the hospital, and I was such a wreck at that time that he actually caught me completely off guard. It was just Vince McMahon on the phone, and I think I thought it was a nice gesture anyway, and we talked a little bit, and like I say, pretty feeble and pretty devastated, and I didn't even know what to say. And we started talking, and I had a guy, a friend of mine that's working on a coffee table book with me at the time, and he does all these really first-rate, guy named Alan Turowitz doing these coffee table books, who I'd seen in Montreal like 4 days before this stroke, and this is like 6 days later. And he was doing this coffee table book, and we were talking about pictures. I said, I don't have any. I don't have access to not any of my shots with the belts and all that kind of stuff, or my footage. And so then when Vince called, it was the first thing I asked him. I said, I have a guy doing a coffee table book, and we just had a little talk about it. He said, you can, because he made this promise to me once before, actually at my brother Owen's funeral, and he went back on his word there. But we talked that day, and he goes, just have him call me, anything you want. And I thought that was a good sign and a nice gesture. And I thought, for me, I have to find a little closure too. I don't want to keep dragging around all this bitterness and hard feelings towards Vince McMahon for forever. I don't know what happened I still don't know what happened with my brother Owen, because it never went to trial, and no one ever justified or explained to me what happened, including Martha or anybody else. It just, someone paid for that to be put away, and that's sealed in a box somewhere. But I mean, once I kind of realized there's nothing I can do to get back to that, to carry it around and have, it's just a big weight on your back all the time. And I had enough weight on my back when I had the stroke, so I just thought, here's a chance to kind of, he's offering an olive branch, and I thought it would be in best interest for me and my family even. And I have nephews in my family that have aspirations to wrestle, and they want, if you're going to get into wrestling, where are you going to go? And I didn't want them to feel like they couldn't go work for Vince if they want to someday. I have a nephew, Ted, who's actually quite a good wrestler, and Davey Boy's son, Harry. They're both great little wrestlers, and I think they are a little hesitant to go work for Vince, and maybe Vince is hesitant to hire them.
I got to ask you this, though. Knowing what you know now, the way your life has evolved, the way wrestling has been, I'm sure the best thing that ever happened to you and the worst thing. If they were your kids, would you try to keep them away from wrestling?
Yeah, I mean, I do steer my kids away from it, but if they really wanted to do it, I mean, wrestling, I mean, I'd rather my kids got into wrestling than, if he was doing drywall or something. Not that there's anything wrong with doing drywall, but it just, wrestling was exciting and a lot of fun, and, I saw the world, and there's a lot of good things that can come out of wrestling. Unfortunately, there's a lot of bad things that happen in it too. It's not a business that takes care of its own, that's for sure.
There's not a man on the planet, there's not a family in the world that could talk about the good and the bad of wrestling like you guys. I want to find out, though, you sat face-to-face with Vince McMahon, right? We'll talk about that when OTR returns. Just a short amount of time left in this. I have to say this has been one of the truly remarkable experiences that I've had on the show. As you know, and I've told you many times, that Off the Record owes Bret Hart a lot. You came on our show when we first started. You put trust in us right away. You drew us an audience, and for that, we're totally thankful. And for the fact that you're sitting here in this worldwide exclusive, it's pretty wonderful. Thanks.
No one's happier to be here than me.
Well, I have to say that you have educated people on bravery and coming back, and you've shown us where you are. You had a meeting with Vince McMahon, which I'm intrigued with, just a couple of weeks ago, right? You guys sat face to face. Tell me what you were thinking in Florida at his place and what came from that meeting.
Well, I just want him to kind of know that I think a lot of people, and a couple of my sisters again, kind of painted this picture of me being this, I was so out to get him, and I was driving the lawsuit, which I never had anything to do with Martha's lawsuit. I certainly stood beside her on it and tried to be as much help as I could, but I was not driving it. And I think he thought that I was really the driving force in the family that was trying to sort of get back. There's a lot of people that really, which I think is just stupid, that think that I had hard feelings for Vince, what happened in Montreal, in comparison to anything else. It's like, you know, I think what happened with Owen.
What did you feel when you saw him? And I'm interested because this is the meeting of two guys that had fought it out publicly, including on this show. You talked about how much you hated each other. He ridiculed you on this show. When you saw him face to face, what was your feeling? And did he shake your hand? Did he hug you?
Yeah, he gave me a big hug. And I think it was, people have to understand, Vince, in a lot of ways, was like a father to me. We were really close. We were so close prior to that last week that I worked, and it was such a shame. I think it was some really bad judgment on his part, what happened. And I felt really, I thought it was time to kind of heal the wound a little bit and let him know that I didn't wander around my house with my fist clenched, cursing his name everywhere. And
not anymore, at least.
Not anymore.
You clearly used to do that.
And I think I thought, you know, he made a gesture, and I'm going to make a gesture back and let him know that I want peace. I don't want to keep carrying around the hard feelings. And he was nice, and we actually talked about maybe doing a DVD on my greatest matches, and we're kind of getting around some of the sore spots that we had. And I certainly don't want to say anything that
I got to ask you,
upsets all that.
Would you come back? Would you? Not as a wrestler, of course. I'll ask you that question.
Not a chance.
Not even appearance.
I don't think so. It's highly unlikely.
What about if he came to you with a thank you tour, saying, you know what, we didn't say goodbye correctly, which is obviously the case back then?
I have thought about maybe if the audience was there, you know, because I have to look at it from his side. What is he going to benefit? But if there was an opportunity to go back and that's one of the things I said to him. I said, I just want to be remembered for my contribution. You know, that's what's bothered me, is you erased everything I did, or you didn't erase it, but you've sealed it so no one really sees it, and I'm not remembered for what I did.
What do you remember of Curt Hennig? Obviously, he's passed away. That news just came to us, passed away yesterday. What are your thoughts?
That was really upsetting for me, because I would say Curt was in one of the top, like my 5 best friends in the wrestling business, and we had such a great chemistry together, and I can't believe that it happened. But someone asked me a few months ago, maybe 6 months ago, said, who is your favorite wrestler? And if you could have one guy in the ring and you could be wrestling him, who would it be? And I feel good now saying that I said it was Curt Hennig. And we had such great matches. And you know, when you look at your career, my career, and you look how you sort of climbed up, I really climbed up wrestling against Curt. And that was, you know, I won the Intercontinental belt against Curt. And if anyone knows the true story about what happened in the SummerSlam that year, is that Curt hurt his back pretty bad. And a lot of wrestlers wouldn't have showed up that day, but Curt showed up in the SummerSlam to
like
put
you're
me
saying,
over.
he's amazing. I'm going to do something I didn't think I'd have to do, which is cut you up, because I couldn't shut you up. And that's the best way it could be. We'll see you next time. Bret Hart 2, 1 week from today.
Off the Record with Michael Landsberg is brought to you by the Keg Steakhouse and Bar. For great steaks, good friends, see you tonight. Michael Landsberg's wardrobe supplied by Grafton & Company. Get it at Grafton.
You know what? Look at that.
I can smile. I can give a real smile if it's
Today, it's part 2 of our amazing worldwide exclusive one-on-one with Bret the Hitman Hart. Today, he'll talk to us about some of his not-so-favorite people, like Shawn Michaels, like Triple H. And what does he think about what Hulk Hogan had to say about him on this show? Today, one-on-one with Bret Hart. Bring it on.
Off the Record with Michael Landsberg is brought to you by the Keg Steakhouse and Bar. For great steaks, good friends, see you tonight.
We are back with Bret Hart. It's part 2 of our world exclusive with one of Canada's best-loved athletes. I argued with Vince McMahon on this show. I said he's a Canadian icon. Vince said he's not. I think I have been proven correct, given the warmth and the love the Canadians have shown for you. And you have sat on this set in the first show, and you showed us all that you are so incredibly far back from your stroke. Thanks so much for joining us. And you know what? It's just great to see you looking so good.
my pleasure.
Okay, let's talk some wrestling now. Let's talk about wrestlers. Let's talk about Hulk Hogan. He was on this show a short time ago, and he had some nice things to say about you, but he also pointed to the fact that maybe there had been some tension, at least from his perspective. Take a look at this clip, then I want you to comment, Bret Hart. Here's what Hulk had to say on OTR.
I love Bret Hart. I love the Hart family. I feel horrible about the tragedy and the problems over the last decade with the Hart family. And I just had a very crazy letter come to my house from Bret Hart's manager or agent. And when my book came out, the gist of the letter was, how could you trash Bret Hart at a time like this? And they actually sent an article where Bret had written this unbelievably beautiful article. I don't know when it was, but it said, if there's anything true or real in professional wrestling, it's Terry Bollea. I've seen him with the kids. And the article was unbelievable. And I felt bad to see the article and the guy thinking I was trashing Bret. And this was Bret Hart's manager. And I explained to my wife, I said, I don't understand the letter. I mean, in the book, I just told what happened.
So, comments?
Well, he's wrong. You know, Hulk...
Nice to know nothing changes. You lay it on the line.
I certainly don't want to open up a big thing with him again, because I did trash him a lot years ago when I was, and he didn't pass the torch to me, and he can go ahead and say it was a misunderstanding with Hulk.
That was the Yokozuna thing, right?
Yeah, and he says that, like, what happened was, I was supposed to wrestle Hogan at SummerSlam for the belt, and we even took pictures, which is maybe he doesn't remember this, or Vince, but I remember we took pictures with a tug-of-war with the belt for the poster. So we know it was a title match. And so over the weeks, Vince tells me that Hulk isn't gonna wrestle me because he doesn't want to drop the belt to me. And so I confronted Hulk on it, and we had a big blow-off about it. And then we go and confront Vince, and Vince goes, it's a non-title match. And I'm going, since when, you know? Because I knew that it was set to be a title match. And so then after I kind of got over that, and of course Yoko got the belt. And people, it's not so much the belt. People don't understand, it's not the belt. The belt in those days was not contracts and stuff. The champion is the highest paid guy in the company. And when the boss of the company says you're getting the belt, it means I've earned the spot to become the highest paid guy in the company. And Hulk Hogan takes it upon himself to redirect my fate and say, no, you're not getting it. He's going to get the main event money, and you're still in the middle of the card or wherever. And I certainly think I worked hard enough to earn that spot. And I think it would have been a great historical match. So I did kind of knock him for years about being a bad actor. I don't know if I said anything wasn't true, but when I got to WCW, I sort of saw things a little differently because I felt that Vince tried to railroad Hulk a little bit in the end, maybe even using me to do it. And I thought I was wearing his shoes a little bit.
So were you guys able to work together in WCW?
Yeah, we buried the hatchet, and I shook his hand, and I never said a bad thing about him or wrote a bad thing about him again. And I wrote a really nice column about him, and then he wrote in his book that he doesn't know what my problem is, and I always bash him everywhere. Hence today. You know,
what was the politicking like in WCW? Because I know a lot of people look at you when you came over there. You were making a lot of money, and there were people that actually suggested on this show that was a reason for tension. What was it like back then?
All I can say was like a lunatic asylum, and I think of Eric Bischoff, who I like as a person, I really do, and I sympathize maybe with whatever he was dealing with. But Eric Bischoff was a lot like that wizard in The Wizard of Oz, you know, with all the... But he really had no idea what he was doing. They never came up with one idea for me, and anytime I did come up with an idea, I was usually turned away. And it was the most screwed up place I ever worked for.
And you've worked up in some pretty screwed up places, right?
Yeah, it was I don't know who said, you know, when I think about how much I came, like Vince, you look at what Vince did after I knocked him out in Montreal. He took that whole storyline and built himself into the corrupt promoter and made basically turned the fortune of the company around through that. And if
Does that piss you off, the fact that he was smart enough to take the tension that he had with you and the fact that you smacked him and the people hated him and turn it into a billion-dollar empire?
Nah, not so much. I mean, it doesn't surprise me. I always, I kind of figured he'd do something like that. But I think what disappointed me and maybe does make me angry sometimes is how poorly the WCW used me. I mean, they couldn't have done a worse job. And you think you know, the scary thing is what they were paying me. They paid me great up until they hurt me, and then you know, they just didn't know what to do. Vince McMahon said to me, he said, WCW will never know what to do with a Bret Hart. And I remember I even said that to him in Florida. I said, you're so right. They didn't have a clue what to do with me from the second I got. I think there was a lot of people that were stabbing me in the back behind closed doors.
Who was stabbing you in the back?
I'll never know. I've had people tell me that.
Think?
I have a lot of people say it was Hogan, but I don't necessarily know that.
Can you have friends in wrestling? Because at the very top where you were, it's all about passing the baton to someone else. It's all about worrying about who's going to come up behind you and take it from you. It must be so enormously difficult to have real friends who are similarly at the top with you.
Yeah, no, you can have lots of them. It's the guys with the right attitude and guys that respect. I think a lot of the real good workers, like the Hennings.
Like who? Like give me examples of guys, because I asked you who stabbed you in the back, but who's a guy that you can remain friends with, even if you got to pass the baton to him or he's got to give it to you, it's still friendship above and beyond?
Oh, lots of them. Like Benoit, Kurt Hennig, you know, even guys that aren't necessarily great workers, but guys with a good attitude and try hard. And, you know, I never had a problem about winning or losing in a wrestling match, contrary to what people might try to say today. But I mean, I never ever had a problem with that. As long as I understood that the guy that I was wrestling was willing to do the same thing for me, if it came down to it. Like, I wouldn't care about tossing a coin for a wrestling match. It was a bit of a brotherhood, and there was a lot of guys that worked for themselves.
Well, I want to ask you about a guy who may fall into that category. Shawn Michaels, back in 1997. He was the guy with Vince that you were most pissed off with, and we'll talk about Shawn Michaels, Triple H, and lots more when OTR returns with Bret the Hitman Hart.
Off the Record with Michael Landsberg is brought to you by the Keg Steakhouse and Bar. For great steaks, good friends, see you tonight.
IC belt, and that was a big...
All right, let's talk about the state of wrestling right now with Bret Hart, who is looking good and sounding good. And I want to ask you about Triple H. When you left the WWF back then, he was kind of a minor player. He was an up-and-coming guy, but he was kind of a minor player. Now, not only is he incredibly big in the ring, physically and of stature as well, but also influence in the company. Writes it, he books it, he does an incredible amount of things. Is that a good thing for the company? Are you surprised, and is he up for it?
I don't know. I always thought of Hunter as a real ass kiss. He had his nose so far up Vince's ass that, and Shawn's, and he was never a straight guy. I don't have much regard for Hunter. I thought he was not a straight guy. Never one of the boys. Never one of the guys in the dressing room. He had his own agenda and was a very sneaky, kind of cowardly kind of guy. That's my take on him.
Par for the course in wrestling, though, because those guys do get ahead.
Yeah, unfortunately they do, yeah. But I don't think, you know, when I look back at my career, I like to think that I was loved by the wrestlers in the dressing room had a lot of respect for me, and they appreciated the work I put in, and they understood that I was a team player. And I don't think anyone could say the same thing about Hunter Helmsley. How
about Shawn Michaels? Because he is coming up on this show in a couple of weeks. And whatever you say now, we'll play this clip for him. He was the guy that you wrestled against Survivor Series, that took the belt from you, that you felt betrayed you, that you felt was afraid of you in the end. What are your thoughts about him now?
I'd say he was a two-faced, lying chicken shit. And I'm probably being nice to him.
And now?
I don't think that's a snake that never changes stripes. Shawn, he was the kind of guy that would make friends with you or bury the hatchet with you 10 minutes later, and 10 minutes later he'd be out there stabbing you in the back again. You couldn't make peace with him. You know, he was a guy, and the guy that was, you know, I think he had put a new meaning to the word sort of prima donna or self. He had such a huge ego, and you know, I think you always got to have a lot of ego to become a champion. I'm sure people say I have an ego, and I think I do, or everyone does. And if you're going to be a big star, you have to have an ego. You have to. It sort of comes down to believing in yourself. But Shawn was a guy that was very insecure and very, I think, weak as a person. And
Well, let me throw out some other names to you. Stone Cold Steve Austin. He's coming back. What are your thoughts on that?
I have nothing but the highest regard for Steve Austin. I think he worked for everything he got. He was a great wrestler. One of the handful of guys that I would love to have wrestled one last time. I don't have a bad thing to say about him. I wished I had heard from him all these years. I never heard from him after Owen passed away. And I think someone told me he had a hard time with dealing with stuff like that. And I think him and Owen had their problems when they wrestled each other. And I remember seeing Steve even in Calgary, and I told him, I said that I felt bad that, because when he got hurt and hurt his neck, and he was pretty hurt pretty badly. And I think Owen kind of, Owen used to turn the business off and go home and spend every moment with the family kind of thing. And he didn't really think about Steve and his family. And I remember I kind of agreed with Steve being disappointed, had hurt feelings towards Owen. And I told him, I said I thought he was right, and that Owen should have been a little more considerate and should have called him to see how he was doing. But I mean, I always liked Steve. Him and I have nothing but the highest regard for him.
The Rock.
Same thing. I saw The Rock. The first thing I said about The Rock when I saw him, and I watched him for the first couple of weeks, I said, that guy's the franchise. That's the guy that is going to take my spot and become the... And he did. He had everything going for him. He was a good-looking guy, a good body, and a lot of athleticism. And you know, being a third-generation wrestler, he had a good idea what it took to be a wrestler, and he was a good guy. I don't know what he's like so much today. I imagine, you know, he's had such a rise now that...
If you were advising him, would you tell him to do what he's doing, which is to leave the company and go to Hollywood and give it a shot, or would you tell him to stay or try to mix the two?
I tell him to do whatever makes him happy. He should never be a slave to the business, but he's in a position to call his own shots. Do whatever he wants. You know, But I will say that I think of all the guys, he deserved it, and I've always been very proud of him and glad that he had the success that he had.
I think I got to ask you this question because wrestling fans, no matter what, believe what they want to believe, and they think everything's a work, and they think that in the end everyone will come back, and you still must get asked all the time, you know, when are you going to wrestle again?
They asked me that in my wheelchair.
They asked you that in your wheelchair. Does it ever shock you how much they really don't buy the reality of the planet Earth? And maybe that's the beauty of wrestling, is that it's a diversion.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. I never minded, but I found it kind of odd, you know. And sometimes I find myself going more, you know, strictly in my own mind. Like, could I do it again? Like, if I wanted to set a goal for myself and say, okay, look, 1 year from now, I am going to come back and I am going to wrestle. Could I do it? And you know, I think I could. I think, being honest, if I want to set that kind of goal for myself, I could pull myself together physically and actually have one last match. I mean, I wouldn't do it because I'm obviously with concussion problems and stuff like that, and there's a lot of reasons why I wouldn't do it. But if I had to do it, and you know, if it was something that I could target as a goal to say, could I prepare myself for it? Yeah, but I mean, I have no desire or interest in ever doing that.
And if you were going to wrestle one more time, and you needed someone that you could trust, as you do every time you get in the ring, but in this case, special circumstances, one match, one time, who is it?
Well, I would have said Curt Hennig up until now. I'd have to probably top of my head say Benoit, because he's sort of my favorite. But I would love to have wrestled Kurt Angle. I think he's like the one guy that I really love watching and I have a lot of regard for. I've never met him.
Bret Hart, the businessman, if you're going to script it, in terms of money, in terms of impact, in terms of pay-per-view buys, who is it?
If I was doing it for strictly the box office, I would...
and there are those who have done it strictly for box office.
I would probably wrestle Vince, I guess. I think that's the natural, you know. Loser goes to hell match.
Well, some would say one of those guys is going to hell anyway. We got a lot more to talk about in this unbelievable interview with Bret Hart. Stay with us. 1,200 shows thereabouts. You were on, I think, our third show. I'm not sure in between those two I've ever enjoyed one more than this. A smiling, happy, and healthy Bret Hart, a blessing to everybody in Canada and around the world that has followed your career and loved you so much in the ring. I got to ask you, you got pen in hand, because I'd imagine that's how you're doing it. You're writing a book, right? Not the coffee table book, which will be coming out as well, but the inside story, is that correct?
Yeah, I think I keep reading these different wrestling books, and I keep waiting for someone to write it like I am, and thank God so far no one has. And I've written, I think, one book already, and I'm working on the second one. And I'm just about finished the second, and eventually I'll finish a third one. I'm doing like a 3-part book.
So you've written a book that has not been released yet?
Not been released. Not been printed or anything.
So you say no one's done it the way I'm doing it. What is that way?
Well, I'm putting you right in my shoes, and I'm giving you the real inside.
Well, we call them teasers. Give me an idea of the kind of stuff you're talking about.
I'm writing it more like, it's very truthful. You know, it's not like anything else. It puts you in my shoes from the time I was very small, through my whole family, through my whole life. I grew up with legendary names like Skylo Lowe, and I watched Gene Kiniski wrestle, and Luthez, and Pat O'Connor. I watched all the old stars, the great wrestlers of the 60s and the 50s. And to have watched even Gorgeous George, who I don't remember, but I mean, those were childhood memories for me, those kind of wrestlers. And you know, someone like Mankind or Hulk Hogan, they don't understand the history, and they don't appreciate the, you know, like
even
Mankind might, but they don't really know. It's all they came into the wrestling business in a completely different time and different phase, and that I bring all that out, and I think I bring out my family, like growing up in such a strange, it was an odd life growing up with 12 kids in a world of wrestling that I remember.
I think most would accept that as being true. It was an odd life.
It's not a nasty book. It's not a. It's nothing. If anything, I've bared my soul. You know, I don't take shots at a lot of people. I take a few shots, but it's not a tell-all.
How about it yourself, though? Because, you know, one of the things that age hopefully does to you, to all of us, is that you get to look back and you say, you know what, maybe I wasn't all that. Maybe I made some mistakes. Maybe, you know, I was a lot more human than I thought I was at the time. What have you learned?
Well, in relation to writing the book, you mean?
No, in relation to your life, as you look back now, you know, the process of writing a book, which I've never done, and probably never will, because I don't have a lot to say. But when you look back with pen in hand, sometimes you're reflective. What you grew up on?
Probably my home life and with my wife and things like that. And those are probably the only regrets. And you know, it's hard to justify your behavior. You know, not that it's bad behavior, but it's like life on the road is something that you have to live life on the road to understand the life on the road. It's easy to criticize and pass judgment, but you can't. I don't think you can. I look at my life on the road and I go, all those years, I wrestled 23 years, and most of it I was away from home, maybe, you know, 300 days a year most of the time, and that's not including travel days back home. And it makes for a pretty tough existence. And on the road, my one rule was survival. Do whatever it takes to get home, and keep your mind. Don't lose your mind doing this stuff. And unfortunately, so many of my brothers in the wrestling business, not my brothers in my family, in the wrestling business, my peers, so many of them are dead today. And a lot of them, the wrestling business was so hard and such a grind. And I've said before how the schedule caused a lot of wrestlers to get hooked on painkillers and pills, and you had to get up, you had to go to the gym, you had to take something to go to sleep, and I think that was part of the lifestyle. And I can luckily say, including steroids, I mean, I can say I stepped around all that, and I maybe got into other trouble, but the trouble I got into, I'm still alive. You know?
And we're happy to see that here today. Let us know your thoughts on all of the things that we do, and nothing we've wanted to do more than this with Bret Hart. Hey, Bret, thanks for giving your fans a chance to hear how things are going for you. It's got to be tough, but so are you. And that was from one folk, but you know what? Millions are thinking exactly that. More in a moment. The end of our second interview with Bret Hart, who so graciously agreed to give us this worldwide exclusive. Thank you so much for that. It means a hell of a lot to us, and I know to your fans across the country, watching you, looking so good, thinking so clearly. It's amazing. Great to see you.
I'm so glad to be here, really. It's a great opportunity for me to address a lot of things all at one time.
So tell me this. You said you wrestled for 23 years. You were forced to leave wrestling because of a concussion. You've had the highest of highs and the lowest of lows. If you could go back and turn back the clock, would you have done something else, knowing what you know now?
Yeah, I would somehow. I think I maybe would have swallowed my pride a little bit if I could do that. I mean, I obviously can't. But I always believed that my brother Owen's accident, if I'd been there, that would never have happened. And people don't understand. People say, "Oh, you shouldn't put that on yourself," but I can, because if I'd been there, like, Owen would come to me with everything and say, "Should I do this or should I do that?" And if he'd come to me with that idea, I would have said, "What are you, crazy? Don't put your life on the line for the..." You know, it's funny when that documentary came out, the Wrestling with Shadows. I remember Owen was really upset about it. He loved the documentary, loved it, and came up to me and told me the only thing in it that bothered him is when I said something about, there was some line in the movie about, felt like I was, you know, it was like putting a gun to my head and pulling the trigger or something like that. And his exact words, he goes, "Wrestling business isn't worth dying for." I won't ever, and I was like, it wasn't a suicide kind of thing anyway, but it really bothered him how much it bothered me, what they did to me or what they were trying to do to me. And when I remember my brother Owen, I think he was so careful and so cautious. I don't know what he was thinking when they got him up there and did that with him. That's about the only regret I ever had.
About 20 seconds left. I just got to ask you, people want to know, at this stage in your life, your health, are you happy now?
I'm getting there. I am happy, but it's hard with the stroke. I'm just getting back to where I was. I was happy the day I was riding my bike before the stroke.
Thank you so much for doing this, Bret Hart.
Off the Record with Michael Landsberg is brought to you by the Keg Steakhouse and Bar. For great steaks, good friends, see you tonight. Michael Landsberg's wardrobe supplied by Grafton & Company. Get it at Grafton.
I've done this Mordecai Richford thing. BBC, down my wall. I kind of got stressed out about it, but I